Hey guys, I want to talk about how I've been structuring my training this year, the lessons I learned from last year, and how I'm making myself a better, faster cyclist for this year of racing. And hopefully some of these points can be helpful to you for structuring your own training. I'm 8 weeks into my training thus far. I took 2 months off and focused on strength work and physical therapy for my back pain, which has always been an issue I've struggled with. I was really hopeful this year would be the year without back pain. I followed a really disciplined regime to strengthen my lower back and all the connective tissue and supporting muscle. My two favorite exercises from that were squats and deadlifts. I worked up to completing 5 sets of 5 squats at 295 pounds and 1 set of 5 deadlifts at 345 pounds. And when I got back on the bike, it felt good for the first couple of rides, then started hurting like hell again. I was very discouraged that this problem just wasn't going away. I took out all the strength work from my program, and after about 5 weeks, it got a lot better. I started reintroducing the strength training, and I think I took a little bit too much time off the bike, and my body just needed to readapt to it and was struggling to handle the load of both bike training and strength work. But once it got through the readaptation phase, all the physical therapy and strength work I'd done was actually able to show itself, and I've been riding pain-free, which is in a nice slow position for the last 3 weeks, which is something I never used to be able to do. So I'm very excited to try to keep that going. Starting out, I needed an FTP to work from because I really like structured power zone training, but I really didn't want to go through the stress of thrashing myself in an FTP test just to get a number that would only be useful for a week or two as my body got stronger again. If you have no idea what your starting point is, I think it's absolutely always good to test, but if you're going to be working off, and if you're going to be working on power percentages, but if you're able to put your ego aside, pick a reasonable starting point, and then only increase your numbers as you see results in workouts, it can work pretty well without a test, because every workout is a test of sorts. So instead, I just took the lowest FTP result I'd ever gotten, knocked a few extra watts off of it, and assumed a 300 watt FTP. Then used each harder workout to gauge whether the number was accurate, and I ended up increasing my FTP by about 3 watts each week on average. Last year, for my base phase, the first phase of training, I did a basically all sweet spot program from Trainer Road, which is a great resource. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, sweet spot. Friday, easy endurance. Saturday, Sunday, long sweet spot again, which worked great, but since I only worked in one training zone, in that sweet spot zone, it was very mentally monotonous and challenging, and in later phases in my training, I really struggled when I was working at anything above threshold. I think there's great value in doing some harder VO2 or threshold sessions because it makes the sweet spot feel much easier because the VO2 session acts as a set point. All the other workouts, although the intervals are longer, they aren't as intensely uncomfortable, and this keeps things in context. Also, because I was so focused on hitting the correct power for each interval, I didn't spend much time working on my aero position, and later in the season I was playing catch up and I had a lot of trouble holding an aero position for longer than 10 minutes without my back aching and having to sit up. So this year, there's been a big emphasis on sweet spot still, 2 to 3 rides each week instead of 5, but I've been making them longer, so 70 to 120 minutes of time spent at sweet spot, whereas before it was usually only 40 to 90 minutes each ride. I'm also doing one hard VO2 session each week and 3 endurance rides each week, and using those times to really focus on extending how long I'm able to hold a good aero position. The first 2 weeks I did 6 rides, but only 2 interval sessions. One was VO2, the other was a sweet spot session. All the other rides were endurance rides, and pretty much all the rides were just an hour long or shorter. This allowed me to ease back into the grind of riding every day, to let my body reacclimate to that strain and to get the endurance adaptation started with the lower level of stress that my body would be able to respond to since I had taken 2 months off. This ended up being about 300 to 350 TSS, or training stress score, for the first 2 weeks. For my first sweet spot session, I started with 3 sets of 10 minutes at 85%, which was 265 watts, And it was a little depressing how challenging that was, considering a few months ago I was able to hold 280 watts for 4 hours. But that challenge was also good because it let that workout be the new starting point. And I knew I picked the right FTP, and it gave me something to work on improving. For my VO2 session, I did 30 by 30s, 30 seconds on at 120%, 30 seconds easy, then repeat. Did those for 2 sets of 10, then the next week 3 sets of 10, then 2 sets of 15, 2 sets of 20, 3 sets of 15, 3 sets of 20, just each week extending the amount of time I was staying with my breathing and heart rate close to maxed out. Interestingly, even though 265 watts was a challenge for a 10-minute interval, I was able to hold 400 to 420 watts for the 30 by 30s, which is far more than 120% of my FTP. And based how my 10-minute intervals went, I wouldn't have been expecting to put out 400 watts for any length of time, but the power was consistent between intervals and between sets and workouts, so I kept 400 watts as sort of the minimum expectation for my VO2 sessions. The progression of VO2 sessions is very straightforward, just adding on more 30 by 30s to extend the time of that high oxygen uptake and heart rate. To progress my sweet spot sessions, I took a more multifaceted approach. I increased the interval time, number of intervals, and intensity of the intervals, but not all at the same time, just pushing 1 or 2 of those dimensions at a time each workout. And for some workouts, I do a pyramid with the intensity. For instance, starting at 88%, then jumping up 2% each interval until I got to 94%, and then coming back down the pyramid. I also use shorter intervals to work at holding a higher percentage around that 95% area, so like 4 or 5 minute intervals. I think the trick with sweet spot training is to mix up the intervals. 20 minutes times 3 or 30 minutes times 2 are both commonly prescribed and fantastic workouts, but they're also very mentally demanding and they're easy to fail out of, and it can be discouraging. But if you build towards those intervals with 10 minutes times 7, 12 times 6, 5 minutes times 10, 15 times 4, it makes the training far more manageable and just as productive and just as much volume each week, because I think the thing that really drives adaptation is the time at intensity, the total time at intensity, and if you put that in, then you'll be ready for those longer intervals in the later weeks, and it'll be far less likely to fail out of something. Fairly early on, I was able to complete 20 minutes times 4 at 300 watts for each interval, which was a pretty good sign that my FTP was no longer 300 watts, which was encouraging. Last year, I followed a training plan from TrainerRoad, which, like I said, is a great resource, and I still use them to track my TSS and to look back at my workouts and get a feel for how the training's been going. But to plan each week ahead of time and each training block, I've taken a more old school approach, and I just use a notebook to write out my weekly and monthly workouts and goals. I find it very satisfying to physically cross off the workouts as I complete them, and it also gives me a little bit more freedom and flexibility because there's nothing set in stone like each day I'm going to do this, but I do have 6 workouts I need to complete in the week, and just gives me a little bit of flexibility, and it lets me juggle things around a little bit if I'm just having a really flat day, didn't get enough sleep, or whatever else might have gotten in the way. Overall, all the training and all my planning boils down to progressive overload. So starting with something manageable with my endurance rides, VO2 sessions, sweet spot work, and just nudging that up. Both with the intensity and with the volume by a manageable margin, workout by workout, and week by week. 5-minute intervals turn into 10-minute intervals, turn into 12, 15, 20, 30. 10 minutes total time, that VO2 max turns into 15, then 20, then 25, then 30. After those first 2 weeks of keeping the workload around 350 TSS range, I jumped up to 600 TSS. A very big jump, but I knew from last year that I could handle 600 to 800 TSS, so I wasn't too worried about that. From there, I tried to nudge up the TSS 15 to 30 points at a time each week. Just another type of progressive overload, kind of keeping track that overall things are going up a little by little. But then also within each workout, trying to have, instead of 60 minutes Spent at sweet spot, 65, 70. Instead of 10-minute intervals, 12, 15, 30. I just completed 5 weeks in that 600 to 800 TSS range. And I'm about to start a recovery week before doing a proper FTP test to kind of track how things are going. It'll be another 5 weeks of base after that, so very similar to what I've been doing, but just continuing to progress everything. But I am very happy with how things have gone thus far, because my last workout on Saturday, I put out my best all-time power for 35 to 40 minutes, which is the first time I've had a power PR for about 6 months. So it's a good sign that I'm on the right track and hopefully going to keep getting stronger. I hope hearing about my training was useful and interesting. If you'd like to learn more about me, I have a book. It's called As Fast As You Can. It's available on Amazon and is about my journey that was a 4,000-mile time trial across the US. Thanks for listening. Hit that like button.